changed my camera position so the angle is a little, I'm getting used to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I am Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Routine.
and tonight we are talking about food movies with a specific focus on, in alphabetical order, Babette's Feast, Chef, Pig, and Ratatouille. So the pitch for this theme was the idea of movies that are not merely, have food or cooking in them, but movies that really kind of explore how intrinsic food is to our lives and whether that's depicting it as like an art form or a way of like ritual and community or any of those sorts of things, but just kind of exploring that seemed like a fun idea to me. So, uh, what, so I know that like it's not like I had to sell you on the theme before, but when we were exchanging messages before recording, you had mentioned that you were even more excited to talk about these than you had expected.
Yeah, I agreed with your concept, and I thought, okay, this is an interesting uh, theme to go with.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just kind of like, hey, this is a reason to pick a couple of movies,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And
Why
then,
not? Right. Yeah.
but I approached it with kind of the same, mentality of like the idea of, food being central in our lives, and really started to think about like how, in particular, like we're the only species for the that I can think of that where we don't just eat to for viability, right? Like that there's a social construct,
Mm-hmm.
traditional construct, the idea of flavoring and, all this type of thing. Like, I don't know of anything else that like chooses to fast either, right? Like, so like we've got all these things around,
Mm-hmm.
where, how we do this. Um, so it was just even just thinking about that and kind of just reflecting on the fact that yeah, it really is just such a central point to being like a human being, right?
Right.
And part of society and groups and all that and gatherings anyway. So that was kind of the start of it. And then the movies were also very good. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen a couple of them and some I hadn't, and I was pleasantly surprised. And just even at the end of kind of thinking about, particularly with Ratatouille and Chef, I just think because the enjoyable, but then when you look at it from that, like those are much more comedic, obviously, than the
Yeah.
other one,
Mm-hmm.
and they're telling the fun side of that, right? Like Ratatouille is telling the whole story about the creation of food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one can be a chef, right? And and Chef is telling this whole story about like his love of cooking and his love of being around it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a particular thing that again, that I come from a Cuban family and love Cuban cooking, and you know, like when they're talking the whole part about like, can you really just have like, is there really a perfect cubano, right? Isn't it just a sandwich with ham and cheese? And it's like, no, no, there really are like, and it made me really, really want one. I
Yeah,
was like,
I hadn't seen that one, so I had no idea. But yeah, certainly once I was watching it and I saw that part, I was like, oh yeah, it turns out that'll work out. Um, but just seeing a weird chat. Anyway, uh, it's interesting what you were saying about like humans being the only species to like, because I think a lot of animals will have different sort of food habits and things that they like more and like less, and like there's some animals that definitely share food within their own little group, like and that sort of thing. There's all, of course, like lots of animals have parents that bring food back to their young and that sort of thing. But at the same time, by and large, for animals, it's always going to be a matter of survival, and they might have different instincts and everything that are supported based on all manner of different factors. But you're very right. I think that for humans, we have a lot more choices that we can make related to what we eat compared to animals, at least for many parts of the world we do anyway. and
Mhm.
uh, and it could be something where everybody could just be eating human kibble, right? Like where it could be that we just made some sort of a really bare bones basic thing and then that was just it. But no, food is something that we definitely choose to express ourselves with, both in the preparation and in the consumption. And there are different cultural traditions around it all over the world. But nowhere is it unimportant.
Correct. Well, and to your point, I mean, anytime anybody's even sort of tried to go down, like the Monsantos of the world and all that type of stuff, when we've tried to make like this sort of genetically processed like speed of food, right? Like think about the outrage that creates, right? Like we're predisposed to not want that, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, and it's funny too, just because one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about the Cuban sandwich is that the discourse around the idea of quote unquote authentic cuisine and what it means when, for example, a white person decides to write a cookbook of authentic Asian dishes and that sort of thing. Like, what does that mean? And what does the idea of authenticity mean when you have all sorts of food traditions that come from, for example, people who live in one part of the world but then move into another part of the world where the available ingredients are different and they adapt their recipes and create a new version of something? Who's to say that that's not authentic in its own way, right? Like these things are complicated and messy and fluid
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of the same way that cooking can be, in the sense that like uh, even when you have people who have perfected the technique and do it really well, you kind of can't help but have food preparation be at least inherently messy in some aspects, because it's just that's what it takes. You can't have it um, you know can't just put it in a machine and press a button and have it come out what you want.
Nope.
So when we talk, what order do you want to approach these in? I mean, I lined them up and then read them in just alphabetical order, just out of whim. But is there one that you are just dying to jump right into?
I mean, those two kind of stood above, but again, I think I was more once I'd kind of bought into the theme, like those just kind of hit that more. I mean, obviously Babette's Feast, like there is a kind of central obvious point to that
Mm-hmm.
too, but um
Well,
Pig was much different than the rest of them.
yeah, yeah. I thought that it was an interesting because I remember when we were choosing the movies, I was kind of torn between that one and another movie called Big Night, which is also wonderful, and I highly recommend people watch that one. But it's also more like the others, and so that's part of why I thought it would be interesting to go with Pig. But actually, I think I literally rolled a die to choose between them. But that was one of the reasons that I was considering it. But let's maybe start with Ratatouille, just because it's probably the one that most people have seen.
Yeah, that's good.
Um, so I I'm going to start with a little bit of qualifiers, in the sense that, like, I love Ratatouille. I think it's a great movie. I was very happy to watch it again. I will say, before we get into all the things that I do like about it, that I have a couple of quibbles that kind of always bother me when I watch it. Um, but those are not so large as to make me not love the movie. So putting that into context. But one of the things that bothers me about it is the character of Colette is so cool in the first half of the movie, and in the second half of the movie, she is just Linguini's girlfriend. She loses all of the ambition and all of the passion that made her so interesting in the first half of the movie, and that's all just gone. Also, Remy treats her like garbage throughout and never apologizes and never does anything to make it up to her. It is assumed at the very end that they seem to be on good terms, but there is no reconciliation that we are ever shown. And so it really is something that I feel like, I know that's not the story that the movie is telling, but it is something that is introduced in the context of the movie and not really ever resolved. And that bothers me. But it's actually, it's a very good example of something that's sometimes called the Trinity syndrome after the Matrix, which oddly enough, I think the Matrix is not even really a super good example of it, even though that's kind of where the name of the trope comes from. But the basic concept of it is the repeated pattern in so many movies of having a hapless hero at first who gets rescued and then mentored by a badass lady, only to then surpass her and be the one who saves her at the end, at which point she is relegated to only support status. There are lots and lots of movies where that happens. And this is kind of an example of that. Because the thing is like she teaches Remy the proper technique, right? It's kind of disguised by the fact that Linguini is the one she thinks she's teaching, and Linguini's falling in love with her as that happens. But nonetheless, Remy is learning from her, and he never thanks her for it. Even the big climactic moment where they're making the ratatouille, the extent of their interaction is him saying, no, not like that, do it like this.
Yeah, these are all true. I can't argue
all
at
right.
this point. Like, it's
So,
not,
having expressed that, I will now leave it alone. It bothers me every time, but it's not the only thing there is to say about the movie. The other more minor quibble I'll have is that the movie is kind of weirdly moralistic about the idea of stealing food. And it feels a little bit forced and contrived to make drama to me. Like, it's when Linguini and Remy are sort of, at their at the lowest point of their relationship, the whole idea of like, you're stealing food, how could you? And then like the earlier bits where Remy's like, we're not, we're just thieves, Dad, we just take, and it takes the weird sort of analogy that they want to play with sometimes and not other times of, are rats meant to be kind of a metaphor for marginalized people? Or are they just rats in a world of humans? Right? And sometimes that metaphor gets a little bit messy, if you think about it in that way. And so I think it feels like they had to try to plant seeds of saying stealing food is bad in order to try to come up with a reason that Linguini could actually be that mad with Remy. Which is a minor quibble, but I don't care that much. So all those two things out of the way, there's so much to love about this movie. And I'll totally say that. But I know you really like this movie, so why don't you speak on it? What is it that you love about this movie?
no, I don't want to get. I was trying to remember if this is you or not. I thought you were the one who also it bothered you that the mechanism by which Remy controls Linguini.
Oh, no, not really. I think that's
Okay, that's
funny in a
somebody else.
cartoony
Yeah.
way. Like, it's obviously ridiculous in the sense that, like, there's no logic to it at all other than just pure Looney Tunes cartoon logic. But
Okay, that's
I don't
there is
mind
somebody I
that.
know that
No.
that part like
Yeah.
that's like full stop like they're like and I'm like that is the weirdest thing to like
Yeah. I
and so
mean,
I thought he'd gotten over it or
it
it's
has to
definitely
be
something else.
something. There's just, like, there's no other way for the movie to work.
Right. Then a rat hiding under the hat who just manages to somehow intuit how to pull his hairs correctly or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, and I have to say, I think the whole part of them trying to figure it out before they come to that discovery is one of my favorite parts of the movie. Of just that whole sequence where he's trying to be inside the shirt and he just can't communicate what he needs, and he keeps kind of saying no, not like that, and so he'll bite him, and then Linguini will slap him, and then he'll bite him again. And then just going into the refrigerator to scream about it. Like that stuff's gold. I love that. So yeah, I don't. If I have ever said anything about it, I think it would have only been in the context of acknowledging that it's ridiculous and makes no sense.
Okay, no, there's definitely somebody I know that it bothers them up to the point where I'm just like, always been that is, but um, I, I think I love this movie. I just think I'm kind of automatically disposed to like liking things where somebody is really passionate about something. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just a
Yeah.
fun thing. See somebody, and it's probably part of why I like Chef too. Um, to see somebody who just cares so much about a thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? That they will go through these, again, it's cartoonish and ridiculous, these lengths when they are unable to do it, they find a way to realize it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's just a fun story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's some other fun things that are in this that aren't in all of these kinds of movies. Like the fact that he figures out like Ego's not just a bad guy,
Right.
right? He's a
He's
critic.
become jaded.
He's become jaded, and
Yeah.
they not only the way they get to him is not only by preparing a phenomenal meal for him,
Mm-hmm.
but by connecting it to like all these things we were talking about, right? Like
Yeah.
finding a memory in his life and helping him revisit that kind of cuts the jade off a little.
Mm-hmm.
And then just I love the conclusion of the movie. Like they don't get away with it.
Yeah. No, I mean that is. I think it would. I think that is a real cherry on top for the movie, is that they
Fun end.
don't try to make it seem like everyone would actually accept this.
Yeah.
And the payoff of, well, we had to put this inspector, we had to let him go eventually. That just said like all of the business of like him showing up when all of the rats are just running all over the kitchen, and then running, and they have to go catch him and tie him up, and then they do the same thing to Skinner. Like that stuff is just so funny in
Yeah,
the movie.
yeah, there's a whole sequence in there
Mm-hmm.
that is just unbelievably fun in that climax, right? Like
Yeah.
when the rats decide to mobilize on this thing and like they're getting cleaned in the industrial dishwasher, like it's just such a funny
Mm-hmm.
scene. They all go in there and the thing comes down and cleans them. Like that would matter. Yeah.
There's a nice little Easter egg in that sequence of some of the rats using pats of butter like ice skates and ice skating back and forth across the pan. That's basically a reference to when the Muppet Rats did that in the Muppet movie.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I
Actually,
didn't even catch
I
that
think it
part.
might be the Muppets Take Manhattan is the one that happens in. Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, it's just like it's obvious when it happens. Like if you looked at the two, it's very clearly a direct reference there. The motion pattern is the same and everything.
Yeah, and without inflaming, like, because I get when you look at the whole context of Colette's story, you're
Mm-hmm.
absolutely right. But and how he does talk to her here, but like just the fact that like this kind of when she decides to help them, like
Mm-hmm.
and that part's kind of nice if you kind of take the other
Yeah.
pieces around out of it. The idea that that no one can understand why they're making the most peasantish food for the most important critic,
Mm-hmm.
and then how it works, and like you said, then they have to let the inspector go, and so it gets shut down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um like it's just that whole piece is just such a joy to
Mm-hmm.
watch.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Because, like, although I can be frustrated that we lose some of the things that makes Colette most interesting early on, nonetheless, the fact that, like her relationship with Linguini even though like I'm frustrated that that's all there is, but what there is of that I think works. I like that she comes back. I like that she first of all leaves at first, and it's honest, the only thing that makes her turn around is not remembering Linguini or Remy, it's remembering Gusteau and realizing that she had been thinking about it with a closed mind when her chef idol had always made a big deal about not doing that.
Yep.
And I like that that's why she comes back. Um, I like that when she does, she kind of says, okay, I can't think about this too much. Just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
I think that's fun. It's and it's kind of nicely bittersweet after that moment of like everyone else left. They couldn't hang. You know, they but like in their defense, it's one of those things where like this is where how much the metaphor is supposed to be reflective of anything in the real world is a little bit wobbly, right? Because on the one hand, if they're actual rats, then it's hard to hold the rejection of that against any of those people who left, right? But if it's meant to be any kind of a stand-in for like marginalized people of any kind, then all of a sudden it becomes like suggestive of racism that they would leave and not want to cook with Remy, right? And so that's where kind of the metaphor gets a little shaky. Now, you don't have to think about it that much. It's just that sometimes the movie calls attention to it and sometimes it doesn't, and those pieces don't fit perfectly. The movie does a great job of carrying you along so you don't necessarily think about it that much unless you have seen it 10 times.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just the way it all comes together in the end is probably my favorite part. Like I said, I love that Remy is so passionate about this thing that he's trying to find any way to do it. Um, and I love I love the Gusteau kind of like when he comes in. Like I think the idea of anyone can cook. Yeah, it's told in this elaborate thing, like even a rat, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that concept I think is great. Like to take the greatest chef that these people have ever known, and his greatest mission is to teach people that you don't have to be that type of a chef to be able
Mm-hmm.
to be a good cook. And I think that's a cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Notice he didn't say anyone can bake, right? He just said anyone can cook.
Well, it's also interesting, I think. This is not a criticism, but just an observation that even what Ego says in his final review is, I think, still kind of a misunderstanding of Gusteau's point. Because he tries to say, oh, I always disdained this idea, but now I understand that it's not that anyone can be a great chef, it's that a great chef could come from anywhere, right? But that still dismisses the idea that it is skills that you can learn. And maybe and it's worth doing even if you're not going to be one of the best in the world, right?
Yes.
Just because you might never be a chef who's going to earn 5 stars in the imaginary scale of the movie, um, doesn't mean you shouldn't learn to cook. Doesn't mean you should think of cooking as this untouchable art form that only the best in the world should even attempt,
Yep.
right? And so I think it's interesting that Gusteau's lesson is still more nuanced even than Ego's final voiceover narration would suggest.
Yeah. I think Gusteau's point is probably more captured in like the way that Remy, with his knowledge and trial and error, is able to like instinctually create recipes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like now he's doing it and again in a comedic way, and he has a lot of things, but that's one of my favorite parts about cooking. So I love that part of the movie too, where he's
Mm-hmm.
just like try a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Like he's not measuring anything. Like he just it's an intuition, but you can tell it's meant to be an intuition based on having trial and
Yeah.
error things and knowing what does and doesn't work, right? Like he's not
Hmm.
just magically knowing these things.
Right.
And it was really funny. Like my sister didn't have any idea that we were watching these movies, or any, hadn't knew I had just recently watched Ratatouille, and I needed she was out here to visit, and I was making a bolognese pasta sauce, but like something got held up, like at the plate, like I got here late and I had to go to an appointment. So I was like, hey, if I like just get this started, like, can you, because it takes, you have to add ingredients at certain times, right? Like it's a spaghetti sauce. And she's like, yeah. She's like, how do I do it? And I was like, well, you take a little bit of this and a little bit of this. And I just laid them all out. And I was like, just kind of, put them in there. She's like, what are you, Ratatouille? And I was like, yeah, that's funny, actually.
It is
I'm like, okay, little chef, you take care of this. Yeah.
it is interesting that I think in a lot of depictions of uh, movie cooking, they they do tend to treat the great chefs like it's a superpower as opposed to a skill, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there isn't an element of talent involved. I am sure that there is. I think there are a lot of factors in what goes into making someone actually a great chef. But there's no question at all that just like singing or playing an instrument or something like that, maybe not everyone is going to be able to become a virtuoso, but that doesn't mean that no one can that it takes that level of ingrained talent in the blood to me to improve with practice, right? Like cooking is something where you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a superpower for you to learn how to do it, and it might still be worth becoming an okay cook as opposed to someone who does not cook, right?
Yeah. Because like I said, the whole thing is it's based on trial and error. It's based on making mistakes and
Mm-hmm.
learning from them. It's just
Yeah.
how kind of what is your baseline for being able to grasp it before you make mistakes, and what is the speed in which you can adjust. That's what separates like a phenomenal cook, right?
Yeah.
Like with enough, you know Madden football, like I could teach you to read a defense, right? It doesn't mean you're going to be an offensive coordinator in the NFL,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's but it's a thing, like you can learn the pieces, and cooking is so fundamental to all of us. Like I said, it's worth doing it, and that's why I make the joke that it's not like anyone can bake, because cooking, you can make lots of mistakes and it still turns out all right. Like you can't make one mistake when you bake something, or it screws the whole thing up, like
Yeah.
you know
Well, certainly, I know people who took up baking as like a hobby during the quarantine. I think a lot of people did that. What you can do is there is some real science to it. And so, for example, you could say, well, if I don't know how much yeast to put in, I can keep track between batches. I can make one batch with this much yeast and one batch with this much yeast and see how different they are, right? But so all of this is, I think, a little bit interesting just to look at the four movies, and we'll talk more about the others in a moment. I don't think we're done with Ratatouille yet, but just in the depiction of this skill versus talent question, Ratatouille and Chef are the ones that suggest that while there is some sort of inherent talent or passion involved, it is nonetheless something you can learn.
Yep.
Whereas Pig and Babette's Feast, I love both of them, but it very much treats the chefs in question as basically these untouchable, like unique individuals who have superpowers that no
Oh,
one else could
particularly
really
Pig.
ever approach that.
Like it's revealed in Pig that like he doesn't need the pig to find the truffles. Like that's making him like a
Well,
superhero.
that and the bit where he says he remembers not only every meal he's ever made, but who it was served to.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's meant to be like literally supernatural in that or anything, but it is implausible. Or at the very least, it would take a very special individual to have that skill, and so the movie is definitely making the case with him saying that. that he is this special individual who has this unique power, this ability, right? This talent. Um, and then Babette's Feast is less like that so much as just, having her backstory have been, a little bit hidden in that way, right? Although it's also interesting, we'll talk about that, but at that time period, there's no way that a woman would have ever been head chef of the restaurant they're talking about. But in any case, that I only know that because I looked up stuff. But anyway, back to Ratatouille though. I agree with what you're saying, and I especially like to all of the stuff with Remy's family, just in the sense that even at the beginning, when they do not understand that his passion for this, and they're trying to talk him out of it, and even when Remy, sneaking around in the kitchen, loses all of them their home and makes them all have to run out of the house and get on boats in the middle of the night. Even then, there's no expressed anger at him. They don't understand, but it does not mean they don't love him. It does not mean they don't want him. It does not mean they don't value him. They are just worried that he is setting himself up for problems because he wants something he can't have, and that's only going to cause him heartache. And I think that's really interesting because I think we can still be on Remy's side, that they are holding him back, perhaps out of concern for him, but nonetheless keeping him from something that could make him happy in a way that would make him unhappy if he did what they said.
Well, yeah, and I like the way they set that up because it's undoubtedly that they have an unconditional love for him,
Mm-hmm.
and compassion for him. Like I like that part, and that the only reason that we disagree with them is because they just don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not they're like they're not doing anything wrong based on their perspective.
Right. Well, and not only that, but it is likewise true that in a lot of ways Remy is pretty naive about it.
Yeah,
Right? He's being reckless. And that reckless, we understand where he's coming from this place of passion, but it is true that he did get them kicked out of their home. He is doing things that at any moment could lead immediately to his own death. Right? Like it's I really think that whole side of it is so well developed, and the way that turns into, at first when it's just his brother, he kind of wants to just show off. It's only a little bit, it's no big deal, and he's trying to persuade to him. It's like, see, I'm doing great. You always were worried about me, but look at what I've accomplished. But then his brother is, he's like, he didn't mean to mess anything up, but like you could almost imagine him telling his friends, almost out of like pride about his brother, not because he's saying, oh wait, let's go take advantage of my little brother. You could imagine him almost bragging that, like, look, my cool little brother, turned out he made good. But then it turns into more and more of them coming, and we can see how that becomes a problem. But then what I love so much too is when the plot intervenes to prevent what would have otherwise been the reconciliation, where he gets trapped, because that's where the Skinner subplot kind of comes back in, and he gets trapped. And, first of all, Remy saves Emile from the trap. But then how does Remy escape? The other rats come to help. And then that's when we get the whole bit of them saving him from the trunk of the car, and it's the dad and the big strong rat with the little science lab animal tag, and then they come to help, and then that's what gets the dad to the point where he's like willing to say, you know, it's not that I ever didn't believe that you cared about this stuff, but now I'm seeing you like be strong and capable in the service of all of this. Like it has made you a strong person, right? You know, and so I love all of that stuff. I think that stuff's great. And then of course, you know, we just touched on Skinner. The whole Skinner subplot throughout is just some of the best stuff. It's just Ian Holm as as this little greedy chef who starts going crazy because he's the only one that is aware there's a rat. And even still he doesn't understand like the whole bit where he's trying to explain to the lawyer and the lawyer's just like, should I be concerned about this? Such great stuff.
It is really great.
And then, of course, the Skinner's plan when he captures Remy is, "You're gonna make new meals for me that I can sell as microwave dinners." Like that's the plan. It's not to take him away from Linguini. It's to exploit him because now he
Yes.
believes he figured out the rat is the cook. I'm going to take advantage of that. It's so silly.
Yeah. There's just so much that's so much fun. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, there's so much that's so genuine and so exciting about this movie, layered with all this silliness
Mm-hmm.
that just makes it a treat to watch. Like,
Yeah.
it was just so much fun to watch this movie again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the things, though, another just theme that I want us to kind of look at over the course of these four movies is, I think in Ratatouille, although obviously food and food preparation and all of that sort of thing, like the emotion of it is like it's well explored as food, but in a lot of ways, thematically, it's treated like an art form, period, right? Like it's it would be hard to imagine the story being exactly the same if it was about painting, say. But it's really more focused on the idea of expressing yourself through art, and this is his chosen medium, right? Whereas I think some of the other movies approach it a little differently, which is not to say that that's a problem. I'm just interested in looking at the different ways they kind of explore it. Yeah. So with that, do we want to move on? You know, we kind of touched on chef earlier as another one where we learn about you know, or food, you know, preparing food, cooking, if I could talk, is kind of a skill you can learn. And chef was, I think, the only one that neither of us had seen, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I know it was the only one I hadn't seen, but so um, but so chef, if people don't know it, it's from 2014. It is written and directed by and starring Jon Favreau, who is lately more known for playing Happy in the MCU movies, but also a director and actor in his own right, including directing the first Iron Man movie that kicked off the whole MCU to begin with. But in this movie, although it came out certainly as MCU stuff was happening already, much smaller little film about a guy who works as a sort of high cuisine, fine dining chef, but who has been unhappy for a little while because the whole business element of it is giving him a bummer and he doesn't like the people he works with. And he ends up flipping out on a prominent critic in a way that makes him pretty much have to leave town. And instead, you know, it's interesting because one of the things that I thought I knew about this movie was that it was about a great chef who decides to start a food truck. And that does happen, but the food trucks is really only the second half of the movie. Like he doesn't get the truck until quite a ways into the movie.
Yeah.
But one of
Well, he
his
doesn't, it's not like he elects to go start a food truck either.
right,
Like,
yeah,
that's kind of that's sort of the impression I had, right? Is that he was like, screw this, life. I'm gonna go open a food truck, and like
Well,
the struggles
right.
of the
Like
food truck, right? Yeah,
like someone suggests a food truck early on and he dismisses it out of hand at first. And it's
yeah.
only until later when he goes down to Florida to visit I think his wife's family. Is that right? Yeah, cuz of course ex-wife is still the mother of his daughter, right? I feel like I'm suddenly second guessing myself. That's
Yeah,
right,
no,
right? Yeah.
yeah, no, yeah. They're
Um,
they're all the
right. So in any case, they go down to Florida and he sort of rediscovers his love for, Cuban food specifically. And the idea suddenly,
son. Sorry,
hmm? Oh, is it son? Like why was I thinking daughter? I don't know.
that's why I was like, I think, am I
Yeah,
wrong?
okay. No, you're right.
Either way,
It's a kid that could be either in this movie. It doesn't matter per se, but yes, you're right. It is son. Um, what was I just watched something else that I think had a daughter in it that I is what my brain was latching onto. I watched this one first a couple of weeks ago, so it's anyway. Um, so then the back half of the movie is him and his son and one of his friends from the other restaurant who has come to join him in this endeavor, rediscovering their love of food and figuring out how to make this food truck thing go as a business. And overlaid on all of this is the most 2014 depiction of social media that you could possibly get, um,
it was
which
pretty fun though.
dates the movie pretty significantly, I think, which is not to say necessarily in a bad way as much as just to say when we think about where social media stands right now, the heavy featuring of Twitter in this movie hits different than it probably did at the time.
Yeah, I thought it was funny though.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad so much as it just reflecting on how there's a different feel now, right?
Yeah,
The idea that one of the things that actually helps make the food truck start to take off is that the son really knows social media and starts like doing like Twitter and Instagram posts of where the truck is showing up and everything. But that this is also specifically leveraging that he went viral when he did this original blow up at the Food Critic in the middle of a crowded restaurant, and people filmed him, and it went viral on the internet, and he became kind of infamous in that way. But then him rediscovering the love and approaching this other thing that kind of gets judo flipped into getting them attention, and then when the food is good, people like it, so that's kind of a big part of the arc of the movie as well.
yeah.
But so,
It also
oh
it
yeah,
also
go ahead.
gives an easy vehicle for him to like have like an early in for his son to be a part of his passion and his business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they needed that kind of that intro
Yeah, yeah,
to like how does he help before he like actually works on the food truck, right?
right, right. Because it's clear that I really like the relationship between Jean Favreau and his son in this movie because it's obvious from very early on that he loves his kid a lot and he's pretty good with him. But what we definitely are told more than we see, but we believe, is that he's great with him when he's there. But also lots of times he's not there because he's working. And lots of times his inclination too with the work is to not involve his son in it, right? And so like this idea of like, sorry, I can't see you today, I've got to go shopping for like food stuff, and the kid wants to come, and then like when he does bring him along, it's like it actually goes pretty well, the kid is interested, but his initial impulse is always to say, well, that's work, I don't want to mix that with my family stuff.
Right. And then I think that his relationship with his ex-wife is good too because
Mm-hmm.
she respects him. She doesn't want to be married to him,
Mm-hmm.
but she allows him in the kid's life. She gives him advice. She's curious about what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like they are friends, like even at the
Yeah.
time when things are strained. But she's the one that like points that out because it's a he's using it's a cliche because it's a thing that people actually do,
Mm-hmm.
and that he thinks when he finds out that his son is frustrated or disappointed that he couldn't do these things, he plans a whole day, right? And all they do is like the big stuff, like go
Mm-hmm.
on the rides, buy all the sugar and all that. And she finally just tells him like that's not what he wants, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
just wants his dad around,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it does kind of fit into that whole discourse of the idea, the rejection of the idea of quality time, because the whole concept of quality time was sort of predicated on this idea that it's okay if you don't spend a lot of time with someone, so long as the time that you do spend them is so-called quality time. But
Yeah.
the flaw in a lot of that line of thinking is that kind of doesn't actually really work like that. It's hard for the quality time to really be quality time if you don't actually see them any other time.
Yeah, I think so. Do you know the author Ryan Holiday?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not placing it.
I mean, he done a couple of things, but he's most famous now for, you know, writing like modern day Stoic, like philosophy books.
Hmm.
Um, but he has a whole like newsletter and like he's got a whole presence and his stuff's pretty good anyway. But he references that a lot, and he I believe he attributes it to Jerry Seinfeld in the quote of like people talk about quality time. He's like, but that's not what I want. Give me the garbage time. Like, give me the time where we aren't doing anything important, but we're
Mm-hmm.
just together,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
nothing's happening. We're
Well,
just sitting around on a Tuesday
yeah.
making microwave meals, right? Yeah.
Well, the other thing that she really calls him on is making promises that he means at the time but doesn't have the specificity or follow through. So like he'll casually mention, "Oh yeah, we should go to New Orleans." And the kid is like, "Yes, please. Let's do that. That's great." And John Favreau, I'm forgetting his character's name, but like so the
Carl.
huh?
John Favreau?
Yeah,
Carl.
Carl. So like
Chef Carl. Yeah.
Carl's problem is that like would he like to go to New Orleans with his kid? Absolutely he would. Did he mean it when he said it? Yes. But also, unless the issue gets forced in some way, it's never going to happen because he's always too busy. That's the problem. Is that he excites his kid with this concept of wouldn't it be cool to go on this trip to New Orleans? But then it kind of just stays a hypothetical fantasy and the kid feels let down like he's been promised something that's never going to really happen, right? And so that's the other thing that she kind of calls him for. It's like you mean well, but you need to be able to follow through on these ideas. But all of that kind of the other thing that's interesting, I think, about his relationship with his ex-wife is that she and his current girlfriend are extremely aligned on you need to quit your job because it is killing you. You hate it there and you just pretend that you don't. But it's so obvious. And we see that in action too, because essentially the issue is that he feels a little bit like he was hired under conditions that he thought he was going to get to be more experimental with the menu at this restaurant. But as what tends to happen is every time he makes a new menu item that's popular, the owner suddenly just says, well, okay, so why wouldn't you just keep making that forever? People like it. It's like, well, I want to kind of try this other thing. It's like, no, you know what? You know what? People like this. Make this. And more to the point, when Carl specifically knows that a critic who has previously talked about whether he's losing his edge or not is coming, his boss basically tells him under no uncertain terms, you are going to serve him the standard menu. You are not going to make something special for him. And that is kind of, you know, uh, that kind of sets the whole thing in motion because the critic predictably um, pans the food by basically saying, "I can't believe he gave me this run of the mill stuff that I've eaten 100 times before. Like this guy used to be interesting and exciting. What happened to him?" And it's this rough review. Now I kind of like that. The critic is played by Oliver Platt, and I kind of like that he's actually kind of a little bit awful too. Like he's not a villain in quite the same way that Ego is at first in Ratatouille, but it's also clear he kind of is enjoying writing the negative review, right? Like maybe he did want the food to be better, but he also digs in on the review more than he maybe needed to. And also, he does seem like a lot of it's kind of for attention and that sort of thing. And he is also, unfortunately for Carl, way more social media savvy. And so when Carl thinks that he's exchanging private messages with this critic, he does not realize that he is actually engaging in a flame war on Twitter in front of millions of people.
Yes.
So,
Which also was very 2014 to just the whole idea that like someone would just like I don't know, the fact that like Oliver Platt like loves that, like that's just so run of the mill on Twitter
mm-hmm,
right now, is like people like wanting to get into those fights and like wanting to do all
mm-hmm,
that. This was like kind of seen as a unique situation in which he was enjoying getting this started.
yeah,
uh, and part of the reason he didn't have to be as much of a villain is because Dustin Hoffman is like a villain in and of
yeah.
himself, right?
The owner of the
Or the
restaurant
owner
that,
of the
yeah,
restaurant. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
And I mean, and he has you talk about like how Ego kind of he takes Gusteau's quote and he kind of misunderstands it. Well, there's a part when you're talking about like so Dustin Hoffman has at one point when he comes in and one of John Favreau Carl's arguments is it's not even just the critic, like we're packed tonight, right? Like all these people wanted to come because we said we were going to make something special
mm-hmm,
because of the critic. And he says, well, that's even more reason to serve the standard menu. If you go to see the Stones and they don't play Satisfaction, are you going to be excited or are you going to be pissed?
mm-hmm,
And it's a complete misunderstanding of like what is happening here, right? Like the whole, it'd be like the better analogy would be if you were going to see some sort of band where they were always creating new things. And that was the reason you go to see them live, is because you get the first glimpse at their new
mm-hmm,
thing, right?
yeah,
Not because it's like, I mean, lack of a better sort of slang term now, it's such a boomer way to like think of things, right?
mm-hmm,
Like, that's not, the people were there not to have the old favorites. The people were there because they liked when he tried new things and they wanted to be the people who got to experience it.
yeah.
And so he
Like,
completely misunderstands what's going on. Yeah.
well, but at the same time, it's also like you can see where he's coming from, and from a certain perspective, it's not an unreasonable way to think about it, right? He's just thinking about it much more in the context of we run a business and I know which meals people order over and over, and I know which meals people look at and say, doesn't that look interesting? And then don't order. And now we're out all of the cost of those expensive ingredients, right? Because profit margins in a restaurant are razor thin. And if you have something that costs a lot of fancy ingredients and then people don't buy it, then you have wasted money.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why not make the thing that we already have the stuff for and we know people like, right? Like you can understand where he's coming from. And it
Oh
makes
yeah.
sense. It's just in such opposition to the artistic impulses that Carl is feeling. He's feeling hemmed in. Um, Although it's interesting too that what he switches to for a while at least is a food truck where he literally makes the same kind of sandwich every day over and 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 over thousands a day. But at the same time, it is a food that he is more passionate about. It's one that he created and because he likes it. And I think one of the big differences too is it he had kind of lost the connection between his preparation of the food and the people enjoying the food before. And there were a lot of reasons for that, but one of the big things about the food truck is he is making the sandwich and handing it physically to the person who's going to eat it.
Yes, and so that was I was going to let you finish your point, but I was going to bring that exact thing because that is 100% what happens, and what I at least took from the movie was that what he was doing is taking his love for this concept, right, of cooking,
Mm-hmm.
and because he didn't love what he was doing, he was falling in love with the idea of these new creations, right? And so it was almost kind of part of the problem. Like Dustin Hoffman isn't wrong that, like you said, like there is a reason that people come and get the same thing over and over again. It's just that that wasn't where Carl was, and that wasn't what he had created there.
It's a bad
So
fit.
it was a bad fit, right? Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about this movie is that he didn't mind making the classics over and over again. Like he didn't even
Mm-hmm.
change the recipe.
Right.
Like it wasn't like Carl's special Cubano. It was
Mm-hmm.
just how do you take the basic Cubano and make it as good as possible and then just have people love it. And
Yeah.
like you said, hand it to them and be there with his friends and his family and the
Mm-hmm.
remembrance again back to the Ratatouille thing, like the connection to that is
Yeah.
important. And
Well, although
and that's
it,
why I love that movie because like I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, those are the thing he created when he was in his, when he got mad, he went home and he was like doing all this fancy stuff. Like, okay, that seemed kind of cool.
mm-hmm.
But what I really wanted when I was done with the movie wasn't that. I wanted a Cubano.
Yeah. You know,
And just
I'll.
basically,
It's interesting though because we were just talking about him not minding making the same thing over and over again when it was something he had more passion for. But it's also true that we saw as they were making their road trip across country, they did make different things when they got different local things. Like
yes.
when they passed through Texas and there was that one brisket place or whatever it was. It was ribs or
Yeah, no, you're
something.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like when they had that, they said, "Oh, hey, like this is a special thing that's only we only have access to because we're here instead of there. Let's make something special with that." But again, so like that was the freedom to follow what he wanted, but coming from that base of the passion to begin with, and it was because he was working for himself and not having to answer to someone else. That was the big part of it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's you probably don't have. I mean, have you ever been to Torchy's Tacos?
No.
So it was a food truck that started in Austin and became a brick and mortar and is now like we just got them here. They've got them in Colorado. They've got them all over Texas. Like they're the best. Like they're they're not like standard street tacos, but there are some standard things on the menu, right? And Torchy's does a taco of the month where they do something creative every month. And we go once a month and we always get the taco of the month. But we also know, hey, if taco of the month isn't any good, we know there's these core street tacos that we've loved
Mm-hmm.
since we lived in Austin that we know we can get, right? And so it's like the same thing. Like it's everybody knows they can go get a Cubano and then, oh, there's something cool. I'm going to try that. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're not interested in that one,
Yeah.
you still have the standard Cubano that you know you're going to leave happy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And so there's another scene. Like there's a lot of nice stuff with just his process of when he leaves the other job, quits slash is fired, because like when he goes out to yell at the critic, it like he knows that this is not something he's going to do and then go back into the kitchen and keep working, right? So but at the same time it is also like once he has done that there is no question that he is fired, right? Like you can't do that and continue to work there.
Right.
But in any case, though, like he goes on a longer than I would have expected journey of talking to lots of different people before they settle on this food truck idea, which is interesting just because, like I said, I thought that the premise of the movie was this gets a food truck, and it kind of is, but it's like it doesn't happen until an hour and a quarter in. But I like that as they are getting things set up, and there's the whole bit where like John Leguizamo has come out to join him, and he's lots of fun in this movie too. I mean, when is John Leguizamo not fun? But
He's always so good.
he's great. And so he's a lot of fun in this too. And so when he comes out to help, and they're getting the truck set up for the first time, and they're getting like the stove delivered that's going to go in the truck, and they have to get it lifted in. They basically tell these guys who are just sitting around the loading docks, like, hey, if you help us lift this stuff, we'll make you free sandwiches. And the guys are like, sure, okay, you know, 10 minutes of lifting stuff in exchange for a good sandwich, sure, why not? And and so that's all happening, and it's working out. And this is the first time he's kind of letting his son sort of be involved and like do things with the cooking. And they had arguments about this prior to this, right? Where the kid kind of felt like, you're only letting me do anything when it's gross grunt work, and you're not letting me near any of the actual interesting part. And they have a fight about it. And so this is kind of the payoff about that a little bit of like, okay, well, I will let you do a little bit more than I think you're actually ready for, because you really want it, only to discover that the kid's kind of doing great for the most part. But there's a key moment that really hit me, which is the kid has burned one of them a little bit and is starting to go ahead and hand it off anyway. And so Carl's like, what are you doing? That one's burned. And he's like, well, they're not paying for it anyway. And he all of a sudden says, okay, I know we're in the middle of making sandwiches, but I have to take my kid aside and have a conversation about this. And I really liked this idea of like him, and I like the way he explained it too, which is basically just to say, this is something I care about a lot. It matters to me, the way making food, and it's okay to not care about it. But if you want to do it, you have to do it right and have some pride in that. Do you think the person who helped us in exchange for a sandwich deserved the one that you were going to give him? It's like, you know, he didn't pay in money, but they helped lift the stuff for us. He was expecting us to make him a sandwich, and you were going to give him a burned one. Don't you want him to have a nice sandwich that he'll like and enjoy and be happy about? And I just liked that, not just simple as you should take pride in your work. There's an element of that, but also the recognition of, this isn't just something that's just going to go out the door and sit on a shelf. This is this is going to be their lunch. And that matters. You know, we're doing this for them.
Yeah.
You don't want to give them a crappy burned sandwich.
And they had paid for it.
Yeah.
They just didn't do it in the traditional way.
Right. And what it really kind of resonated with for me is the TV show The Bear, which is also great. And if people haven't checked that out, they should. It's on Apple TV. And it's also a show about like cooking and running a restaurant. And then especially into season 2, one of the things that I really like about it is the increased narrative focus on the idea that although the cooking is obviously very important for running a restaurant, it is far and away not the only thing that's important, right? There are lots of things about running a successful restaurant that also have to be good for the restaurant to be successful, and it can't be only the food. You know, so and what it all comes down to ultimately is caring about whether or not the customer is having a good time. Like, will they like the food? Sure, but that's one thing. Is it also a nice place to sit in? Do the people who help you treat you well? Like, these things matter. And not just, well, you won't be successful if you don't do that, but also, what are you doing this for if you don't care about whether or not the person receiving your work is enjoying it or not? Because there are probably other things you could do and be more successful if that's not something that matters to you. So the idea is, if what you want to do is prepare food for people, you can't only care about the food, you also have to care about the people. And that I thought was really cool. I thought that was a great moment, a great, teaching moment and bonding moment between the two of them, because the kid, it was obvious, hadn't really thought about it like that, right? And he was kind of probably just a little bit embarrassed that he burned one when he's trying to impress his dad, and he was trying to just kind of push it off and try to not make a big deal about it. It was a very kid thing to do. But to have that become this moment of like this is not about being mad at you. This is I want you to understand why this is important. And I just thought that was a really great scene. Probably the standout scene for me in the movie.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
I gotta shut this blind.
Okay. Yeah. So the other thing, we talked a little bit about Oliver Platt as the critic, who's also in The Bear, incidentally. But one of the things that I kind of like at the end is, although I think narratively he's a little bit of a Deus Ex Machina at that point, I did like when he first of all, he only manages to try one of the sandwiches by sending someone to buy one for him, because you can get the sense that, first of all, I could totally understand why Carl would not want to serve me a sandwich after everything that we kind of went through before. But I do want to try it. And so he does, and he tries it, and then eventually goes up to talk to him. And I like that there is this recognition of all the different layers of their relationship, which include, for example, look, when I used to talk about how much I liked your food, I meant that. I wasn't just saying so. It was important to me. And that's why I said those things. And so then when you weren't being inventive, I nonetheless meant what I said about those things. And yet also, I'll acknowledge I was shittier about it than I probably had to be. And so that part of it is on me. But also now I can see that what you're making has you feeling that again. And I'm so happy about that. And then on top of that, I'm going to Deus Ex Machina your business. Which I don't mind. I don't hate that about it, but it does kind of just come out of nowhere to give the movie a happy ending.
It felt like to me like it was because this movie came out after Ratatouille, right?
Oh yeah. It was like 7 years after. This is 2014. I think Ratatouille is 2007, maybe 2000. Let's see. When Ratatouille is 2007, yeah.
Yeah, I felt like it was almost like an homage to Ratatouille.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can see that. It's definitely feels a little bit similar, because although what he invests in is not more food truck per se, right? It's more like, you've obviously found your passion again. How can I support that? And ultimately it seems that what that becomes is another brick and mortar restaurant, only this time he gets to control his own menu.
Yeah, which I think was a good point, because it wasn't about the food truck.
Right.
The food truck was the vehicle that got him to connect.
Literally. Sorry.
Literally, the vehicle that got him to connect with his staff, his family, and his customers on a level that was different, right? It got to like kind of reboot him. It wasn't about having the truck. And I mean, so I thought that was a cool ending. I didn't think that was, because in the way that you first think of how the story is going, like before you watch the movie, right? Like, oh, chef quits restaurant to
start a food truck. That's kind of what it
truck. Yeah. Like, you wouldn't think that would end with him back at a restaurant.
Right.
It makes sense with this because the food truck connects him. It's not.
It's kind of like the catalyst.
Yeah.
It lets him rediscover what he was missing before, which I think, if you drill it all down, ultimately amounts to he doesn't want to have a boss. He wants to be the one in charge. I mean, that's kind of ultimately what it was.
Or just want to make really good Cuban food.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that extra layer,
Yeah.
I mean, it just made the point stick
Yeah.
so much for me because I like Cuban. I mean, I like
Hmm.
Cubanos a lot, right? But all my best memories of having Cubanos are like the place it came from or
Hmm.
who I sought it out with, like those kinds of things,
Yeah.
right? Like I mean, the sandwich is good, but there was a little place in Austin that
Hmm.
like this weird little cafe that was in this neighborhood that you would never go to, but it made these awesome Cubanos and had Cuban coffee and all that stuff. And like the trips where you would go down there, it'd be like, how is this place even here? Like it didn't
Hmm.
fit any of the rest of the vibe of the neighborhood. And like, those ones I always remember. I mean, I always
Hmm.
get them with my parents. Like when I'm in Miami, we always make sure we go and with my family. Like
Yeah.
it's a part of all of this theme that we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
Like I don't really sit around and just like make Cuban sandwiches, even though I like them. I do them because they're part of like my family and a thing to do with my family, something we all enjoy,
Hmm.
something that's unique to the parts of like again to Miami and to the places where my grandma lives, like to go to those little shops. Like so I just that this was the movie. Like I started with Ratatouille. The order I watched them in was this or was Ratatouille, then this.
Okay.
Was pretty like kind of primed with like
Hmm.
Ratatouille and like okay, I'm getting this theme.
Hmm.
And this came and it just hit me with like all of the things that we talked about why we're
Hmm.
watching these movies. And I was just like, I was so ecstatic when I finished this. And
Yeah.
I even thought about I didn't actually go get a Cubano because I realized it's not about it wasn't about the sandwich, right? Like
Hmm.
I didn't have the whole the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
Like because there's not a place here that does them in a way, and there's not like a thing to go do here. Like I have to wait until I'm in that scenario again, but I'm
Hmm.
really gonna love it when I get it.
Well, but it's also such an illustration of how we do form these emotional memories about food and specific foods and tastes and smells and all of that. Whereas, like there's lots of other artwork that might move us, but we don't necessarily attach them to phases of our lives in quite the same way.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and this one in particular because like it's not Cuban food in general, right? There's plenty of Cuban food that I make. I have my own recipes for things that like I've ratatouilleed and changed from how I was originally given them, and my family loves them and stuff like that. Like I'll make plenty of Cuban food, but I think the Cubanos because like they're not hard to make, but they do take a skill, right?
mhm,
Because they're a sort of a panini and they have like a very special like bread and the buttering on the bread and like it's just not a thing you can replicate at home without tons and tons of practice.
mhm,
It's also a really easy thing to eat in a group of people, right? Because they come out this big and you can just cut them up and like people can pass them out.
mhm,
Like that's what we do as a family. Like we'll be like, all right, let's get 6 Cubanos, right? And then we'll cut them into 6 pieces each, and you just eat until everybody gets, like the giant hoagies, right? And at
mhm.
sports games, like it's like that. And so it's just such a unique thing that I know I'm talking about a lot, but it's like this is what I mean. It triggered this. Like it was
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
and it reminded me of all of this. And I thought
Even just
about like,
talking about it now makes me want one.
and it's probably different because like I want one now too, but I don't just want the sandwich. Like I want that experience of being with those people and doing those things and going to the
Mhm.
places that make those sandwiches. Like I don't want to make
Yeah.
myself a Cubano. It would be fine,
Mhm.
but it wouldn't be any of that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
So, in any case, it's a good movie, and it's like narratively, it's pretty slight. Like it's well told, but it's a small stakes movie. It's mostly just about this family, but it's a lot of fun to watch, just like as a movie. But it was definitely a great choice for this theme. So, good pick.
yeah,
Um,
I really liked it. So
yeah. All right. So, I think just accidentally we talked about the two that you suggested. Is which would you like to move on to next?
um I think I'd move on to Pig, which is a good movie, but it's
Okay.
different.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can kind of close out with Babette's Feast, is one I know you really like.
Yeah.
I like, I'm not going to have the same kind of like
Mm-hmm.
enthusiasm that I had for these two, but that feels nicer to close with
Sure.
than to kind of
Okay.
Pig. Yeah.
So
Blue.
The thing that I think is interesting about Pig is like the thing that I often sort of sell it with when I'm recommending it to someone is that it feels very deliberate in its intention to set itself up like it's going to be some kind of a John Wick movie. You could almost even imagine it taking place in some little corner of the John Wickiverse, where the whole premise is we've got Nicolas Cage living like an old bearded hermit in the middle of the woods with just a companion pig who helps him look for truffles, which he then sells to fancy restaurants. But then one night, people break into his house and steal his pig, and now he wants to get his pig back, right? And so we could imagine a John Wick style movie with that setup. And I think that the movie is very intentionally, at many points throughout, trying to actually sort of maintain that expectation, even though its intention actually is to subvert that at almost every point. Like it keeps setting you up to think that something John Wick like is going to happen, only then to go in a different direction entirely.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting.
It is really interesting because, like, just, there's a couple of points in there, like, when he first goes to the city and he has to, like, figure out, he has to go to this underground, like, fight club style place to
Yeah.
find things. And he makes this big show of, like, how people are going to bet this and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
then he just, like, you think that he's just going to go, like, I'm not sure what to think, but it's like
Well,
kind of, yeah, you thought he was just
it
going to, like,
it seems clear. So it's a confusing thing for to exist, but it seems clear that what is happening here is that
their kitchen staff, right?
yeah, kitchen staff who have so much pent up frustration and anger against the chefs that boss them around that they can essentially pay to beat up chefs. And he has got such a reputation as being this incredible chef, but I think it's also suggestive that there are maybe many for whom his reputation is not merely just that he was really good, but also that there were perhaps other things about the way he did it that made kitchen staff want to beat him up.
Yeah,
But
and it's
it's
clear as to whether he's gonna like take this beating and then
yeah,
like go on some rampage and like
right.
beat the shit out of them and demand the information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of get this feeling that that's gonna happen, but no, he
Yeah,
just his
right.
ass kicked.
Because
Yeah,
it's you sort of are set up to think it's like a fight club, and I guess there's some similarity. But key to the whole setup here is he does not fight back.
right.
He lets himself get beat up by this guy in exchange for a sort of promise from the guy running the thing that they'll give him the information he needs. Um, Also worth noting, as far as the plot, is that when his initial attempt to try to go after and look for his pig falls apart immediately because the truck that he apparently keeps for emergencies has been left to disrepair for long enough that it just won't run at all. And so he essentially bullies the fancy pants wannabe somebody restaurant guy Amir, who drives up in a fancy sports car into the woods to buy these truffles. Kind of bullies him into giving him a lift into town, and basically saying, "Look, I know I'm your connection for these truffles. If you ever want truffles again, you're going to have to help me get my pig." But in the process of this whole thing, they kind of end up connecting, on more levels than that. Just as because Amir, although he knows Rob as Nicolas Cage's character only as the guy I buy truffles from. And he does not know that he is apparently working with one of the most famous chefs in Portland history, except who, as far as everybody else knows, has been missing for 15 years. And so it is only his sort of gradual discovery of who it is that he's actually driving around in this process. Um, and what we also discover kind of just through this episodic adventure of him, Rob trying to follow this chain of like, it is very episodic because, you know, like he's following, you know, the leads, but I like that there's just little changes. Like another good example of a turn is he goes to like the local truffle market where other people who are kind of doing the same business work. And at first, they're kind of just saying, "Oh, what are you doing here? You never come here." And they're kind of dismissive. But then when he basically said he's asking about this one particular couple, and everyone's kind of like, "Oh, whatever. Why are you asking about them? They stole my pig." And then this woman is just all of a sudden, "Oh, this is like she's completely done with what she was doing before. Now we are working on this. I know exactly who those are. Come with me. We're gonna go get them." But what go get them turns into is these are two meth heads who clearly broke into his house, hit him with a club, and stole the pig, and then sold it to someone. And what does he do when they go get him? Is he has a conversation about who they sold it to. And it's obvious they feel kind of bad, and he is fine with them feeling bad. But that's it. He just wants to know who they sold it to. And I thought, like, that's kind of, I think, the first example of something where we're expecting him to go, like, beat the crap out of them or torture them or something. But no, he kind of understands why they, in their position, like, he is the victim of their crime, but he also understands where they're coming from and why they might feel that they were driven to do this to him. He does not take out his anger on them because he knows all they did was accept a job from someone who paid them to steal the pig.
Yeah, and they very much lean into like having Nick Cage as the lead too, because he can play that, right? With that the growling of like, I want my pig, you know, I just want my pig. Like you feel like, especially after the series we just watched, right? Where like the Commandos and the, you know, the Steven Seagal movies, like that's what would happen here. Like you'd have this sole focus on getting your pig back and you wouldn't care who you left in your wake, right? And he delivers the lines like that, but that's not how the scenes play out.
Yeah, like, and I think Nicolas Cage is great in this movie because it's exactly like you said, is that he is simultaneously playing this smoldering anger, but also kind of this profound gentleness that are somehow compatible with each other within this guy. And so we have just, you know, several sequences of things like that where we're sort of set up to expect some kind of a violent confrontation. But the most violent he ever gets is when he takes apart this former student of his, not physically, but by pointing out that he has totally abandoned anything that he ever actually cared about regarding cooking in order to chase the trends. Like, you know, and it's interesting in a couple of ways because this particular chef, his whole thing is deconstructed this and deconstructed that. And what does Rob do? Basically takes apart, look, I know why you're doing it exactly this way. He does taste it, you know, like kind of casually almost, but then basically says, look, when you worked for me, I fired you after 2 months because you kept overcooking the pasta, but I know that you cared about cooking and you cared about these other things. Like you wanted to make an English pub, right? So why are you not doing that? Why are you doing this instead, where this is all pretentious and fancy, and these people that you are eating here because it's trendy, not because they even like it. And you're making it because it's trendy, not because you like it. And basically just explains to this guy, you have abandoned everything you've ever cared about in order to chase your perceived success, and it has turned you into a shell of a person. But at the same time, he does not do that to be mean. He does it, A, because he's trying to get information about where his pig is, but also B, because he wants him to not keep pursuing this thing that's hollowing him out. It's like, you shouldn't be doing this. This will ruin you. It's like Carl's ex-wife and chef telling him to quit his job at the restaurant, you know? And so it is simultaneously the most violent he gets in a sense, but it's also extremely an act of tough love in how mean he is about it. And yet it's also all in the interest of, pursuing his own need to get his pig back. But at the same time, every time anyone hints at who it is that's actually done all of this, it's very John Wick-like in suggesting like, oh, this guy's dangerous. You don't want to mess with him. He's so powerful. When basically what it amounts to is he's just a rich guy that has a lot of power in the restaurant business in Portland. I mean, that's what it is, right? Like it's not like an secret agent or something.
Right.
But so he's following through with all of that, and there's kind of a running theme too, is like as we go through each of these episodes, we learn a little bit more about Rob's backstory and what he was like when he was in this whole business. And we had seen just a little bit of a hint early on that he had a tape that was clearly like made for him by a woman that he kind of started to play and then bailed like early on, right? And so we realize as we learn more about him that this was his wife and she died. And that seems to have been what sent him spiraling out of the whole everything. And then he also gets closer with Amir, who he recognizes as someone who feels kind of like he's not really sure he has any sort of meaningful talent, but he's trying to be important. He's trying to impress his dad. And eventually turns out that the guy who arranged to have the pig stolen is his dad. And what's worse, Amir realizes after the fact that he probably did it because I told him about my truffle connection. And so Amir realizes, oh no, this happened because of me and me trying to get my dad's approval. But there's actually there's just like in the John Wick movies, there's a lot of sort of mythological parallels that they're layering in here. Like that one restaurant where the guy deconstructs everything is called Eurydice. And the story of Orpheus and Eurydice is the whole thing of like, don't look back. You can't look back or else it'll all fall apart. You have to just kind of keep moving forward, even though you don't know what's going to happen and you're not sure. Like that's that whole that whole myth, right? And even by that same token, one of the things that's kind of just hinted at but not spent a lot of time on is that Amir's mom, this other guy's wife, has apparently been in a coma for like a long time, suggesting to the point where it's like probably they should have taken her off life support a long time ago because there's not any meaningful hope of recovery. But instead, his father just continues to pay for her to stay on life support for years when there's not really any hope there, which you could make into a parallel of Hades keeping Persephone, half dead, right?
Yep.
And so some of that stuff is in there, but not necessarily critical. But ultimately, like when it comes down to, we have finally gotten to the boss, right? The big boss, and the end boss of the video game, so to speak, who basically says, "Screw you! I'm not telling you anything. Go away. Get out of my house." And again, instead of doing something violent, what does he do? He connects with Amir again and arranges to buy a lot of fancy ingredients in order to cook him a nice meal that will basically make him so sad that he'll just fess up what happened to the pig.
Yeah, but even that scene is delivered to
Mm-hmm.
your to keep your John Wick thing going,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
when he goes, oh, we're going shopping. He
Mm-hmm.
goes, what are we getting?
Yeah.
Well, what are we going to do? Gonna get back my pig, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's like the time when they go to the armory,
Right.
right? And
Well, and
get
like
all the
in John
weapons.
Wick, they do the whole thing where they're describing guns as though they're wine or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing is like
Mm-hmm.
you think they're and even at that point, like as much as you've watched this movie, like the first time you see it, like as much as you've kind of seen them do this over and over again, you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, now he's got no other out. Now he's gonna go
Right.
to the mattresses, right? Like now
Mm-hmm.
he's gonna go but no, he just goes and buys food
Right.
ingredients.
Right. And
Which,
this is where we have the kind of, it's implausible, but you kind of have to just roll with it. This idea that he remembers. First of all, Amir had told him earlier about the tension that there had been between his parents. And once he has learned who Rob was, says, the only time in my whole life I remember my parents being happy with each other was after they had had dinner at your restaurant. And that is in an earlier scene. And so then what we learn is happening is that basically Rob prepares this guy that meal. And it is something that just, the emotional content of that food is so powerful to him, in kind of the same way that you're talking about, like the emotional connection you have to the Cubano sandwiches is not even necessarily about the sandwich itself. It's that it's connected so powerfully in the emotional part of your brain to the people you ate them with and the places where you ate them and just that part of your life, right? And so it's this recognition that making that meal for him allows this guy to reconnect to the time in his life where he did care about people and he did care about things. And he wasn't just a jaded asshole. And it's kind of, he ratatouilles him, right?
yep. That was a
And
good one to start with
hmm,
thinking back on talking about these. Ratatouille is a good one to start with.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. And so it's revealed devastatingly that what happened is, unfortunately, in the process of kidnapping the pig was hurt and they were not able to save her and she died. Heartbreaking.
Yes.
And, and what happens then? He cries. And then they leave. But the focus on that scene is almost less even on Rob or this guy telling him. But we watch Amir go through a whole roller coaster in that scene because he's recognizing his own involvement in it. There's the recognition that my dad did this thing that hurt someone that I've come to care about. But also, like, I helped this guy when we came all this way, and now there's nothing. But also, maybe he is feeling some sense of hope that his dad is opening up in a way that he hadn't before, and recognizing him in a way that he hadn't before. And like, there's just all sorts of emotion going on with him in that scene. But then, of course, like, the finish is, the linchpin of the whole thing. First of all, I think we reveal, as you mentioned earlier, like before it even gets to that last scene, Rob confesses, is like, well, technically, I've been holding hostage this idea that you have to help me get my pig back because that's the only way you'll get to truffles. But technically, I know how to recognize which trees will have them. And so I don't actually need the pig to do that. And he kind of says that, like, I feel like the way he says it in the movie suggests he believes it's true. And I'm not questioning that. But it also, narratively, he's trying to give Amir an out, right? Like, you don't have to keep doing this with me. Like, I will get you the thing that you need. You don't have to keep helping me. But at that point, Amir is invested enough that he wants to follow through. And so, but then we get to, the very end after they've learned the truth, and they just go to that same little diner that Rob had walked to use the telephone. They have the conversation where nominally they're talking about the pig. And Rob is saying the nuance here, or like the strange feeling of it all is that if he hadn't come looking for the pig, the assumption would have been that she was out there alive somewhere, even if she wasn't with him. And he might not know, but it was at least possible. Whereas in going on the journey to find her, now he knows for sure that she's dead. And there's some mixed feelings in that. But even though they're talking about the pig, it's so clear that there's a real parallel about his wife. Because when his wife died, he left his whole life behind and just wouldn't let himself even think about her. But in going on this journey to find the pig, he kept running into the places that he used to go with his wife, the people that used to know his wife, their old restaurant that is now a bakery instead of the restaurant that they had. And so he keeps having to re-engage with those memories. And so even as he is nominally talking about the pig, what he's saying is, if I didn't go on this journey, I could imagine that maybe she was still alive, but now I know she's not. And what we can kind of recognize is, even though that's a sad revelation, it will kind of allow him to finally really grieve, right? It will allow him to move past the denial stage. And so he's able to play the tape. So it's not a happy ending, really, but at the same time, it's happy in a cathartic way, because he's been stuck for so long, unable to process his grief, and we suspect at the end that maybe he will be able to now. He's reconnected, and it didn't end the world. Maybe he could stay a bit more connected than he has been, and that's probably a good thing. And so, like, I really like the movie, and what I think feeds into my reaction of it is just that I had thought when I went to watch it for the first time that it was basically like John Wick, but with Nicolas Cage instead, and a pig instead of a dog. Like, that's what I thought I was putting on. And I just think it's fascinating how it plays with that, but that it makes his talent of preparing food, it is the way he gets in to turn things emotionally rather than using a fighting skill to overcome obstacles physically. And I think that's really neat. So I've talked about it a fair amount. I mean, so like, I mean, what did you think overall? Like, you just kind of was different than you expected, or?
Well, that's kind of why I just kind of let you go, because
Mm-hmm.
you were expressing a lot of the things that I felt about it,
Hmm.
right? Like I'm not trying to cheapen out of it,
No,
but
that's all
like
right.
that description and like kind of how you took through the beats of it and like what you're feeling in the beats of it, like that's very similar to how I felt. Like
Mm-hmm.
I it was, I mean, it was a heartbreaking story, and for multiple reasons, because yeah, like the pig ended up becoming a stand-in for his wife,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like in a way, like not to
Yeah.
cheapen his relationship with her,
Right.
but he was using and focusing his relationship on the pig as a reason to not have a relationship with anybody else.
Right.
Not to it. And what we didn't even learn, like that's, we knew that from the beginning, but we didn't learn until the end, is that he was also using that relationship with the pig to not grieve his wife properly.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean, it's obvious right from the beginning that what he's doing is not healthy. I mean, it's one thing for someone to kind of just like solitude and want to live out in the woods or whatever. But, we have Amir making reasonable observations like, you sure you don't want some of this money to go to like a camp shower, for example? You can heat water and take a nice shower. No, no. Sure you don't want to have a telephone? I mean,
yeah,
I'm worried that I'm going to come out here and find you dead or something.
right.
And we see when he tries to leave, it's like he's left his truck in disrepair for so long that it won't even run. So like he in the case of an emergency, he has no one to call except this guy who buys truffles from him.
Yep.
Yeah, but in any case, I think it's a very like I think it's a very interesting movie. Nicolas Cage apparently says it's his favorite movie that he's ever done. I think he's great in it.
I
Um,
think he's pretty, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's especially just because the character's kind of unexpected and nuanced in strange, interesting ways. But so in any case, that's Pig. Um, do you want to move on to Babette's Feast?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if I can feed my dogs while you open it, because they're just
Okay.
you're like uncomfortably.
Well, I've definitely noticed you occasionally having to mute to soothe them.
Yeah, like they're definitely ready to have dinner. They're both like, now they've at least gotten right here, but they're just like
Okay.
right.
Well, since you
So
have watched the movie, perhaps I can go ahead and introduce Babette's Feast while you do that. If you want to take a moment.
it's quick because their bowls are just right here.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Okay. Well, so Babette's Feast is a 1987 Dutch language film um, that won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film that year. And it was well regarded, and it is comes from a short story written by the same woman who wrote Out of Africa, and it was a woman who had actually lived in South Africa and she was a really interesting person. Actually, I watched some of the special features on the Blu-ray and had a lot of stuff just about the writer of the original story, who is quite a character. Um, that I won't necessarily go into too much detail here because it's off topic, other than to just point out she's an interesting lady. But so the basic premise of Babette's Feast is that we have this little town um, in the middle, kind of nowhere, in the in in Sweden. I'm suddenly forgetting which country it actually takes place in, partly because it's actually changed from the book, and that was something they talked about in the special features. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, Probably matters to the people who live there, but the point is, we have this little town. This is in probably the mid 1800s, I think. It's a very little provincial town that was kind of formed around this one particular, very sort of charismatic preacher guy who founded a church there, and a community kind of formed around him. And then eventually he died, but his two daughters um, kind of picked up where he left off and tried to lead the community in the same way. And they very much meant well. And nobody, like, it's not that they did anything wrong, but just over the years since, the community has kind of aged. Young people leave and don't necessarily come back. And, old grudges have started to form, and things are kind of just, slowly, um, sinking in this little town. And it's very still, very religious community, where everything is sort of very set in its ways. But these two sisters had at one time, a few years prior to the start of the story, uh, decided to take in a French woman named Babette, who came to them basically saying, I've been forced to leave France. And it's left a little bit vague exactly why, but it suggested that she had some involvement with some revolutionary activity there. Um, and she had to leave, and she had nowhere to go, and she was basically begging them to let her work for them. And they're basically saying, we don't actually have money that we can pay you with. And she says, I'll work for free. And they don't know about that. But she basically begs them and says she has nowhere else to go. So they agree, and she becomes their maid and cook. Then, years after that, we learn that Babette's only remaining connection to Paris is a woman who had been entering her name in like a lottery every year, just kind of in memory of her, only to discover, oh, she won. She won 10,000 francs, which for this little town is a lot of money. And so the sisters are worried. That means, well, obviously now that she has money, she's going to leave. And they're happy for her, but also sad that she's going to leave. They care about her. And so Babette, in kind of the process of all of this, says, your father's birthday is coming up, and I know it's a big one. I would like to make a feast for the community to celebrate his birthday. And the sisters assume this is kind of going to be like a goodbye feast sort of thing, and they agree to it, but they start to become concerned. Wait, she's French, and she is offered to make this feast, but says it has to be her way. She is going to try to make some sort of a strange, weird witchcraft feast somehow. And even though they have trusted her in their home for all this time, they suddenly, because of they're this little parochial town that never gets anything new, she's talking about making this luxurious French feast that's going to have wine and turtle soup and stuff like that. And they basically get so freaked out that they talk with all of the other community members, and they all agree, we will eat the food so as to be, polite and to honor her. But we don't want to be seen as committing sins of indulgence. And so we will not say anything about the food. And so we proceed to have the feast, only for it to be gradually revealed by one of the guests that he recognizes that what they are being served is basically a meal equivalent to the sort of meal you would get at the best restaurant in Paris. And he is just astounded. And one of the delights of this movie, I think, is all of these townsfolk still committed to their idea that they're not going to say anything about the food, and yet it being so obvious that it's really, really good.
Yeah, that part's fun.
Yeah. And then this experience of them, even though they won't talk about it, them all having this communal positive experience with this meal ends up having them do things like forgive that old grudge that you've been carrying for so long. Maybe be willing to finally say, my husband's been dead for 15 years. Maybe it's okay if I kiss my neighbor. Like that sort of thing. And having them all kind of, in a way, almost against their will, being kind of profoundly healed as a community by this feast. And then kind of, spoiler, it's revealed that she spent all the money on that meal and is not going anywhere. And all of this is kind of tied in with subplots about the various men that had been in love with each of these sisters in their youth, but because the sisters kind of were so afraid to leave their father, they kind of, those relationships got shut down at that time. But then both of them kind of becoming, like, not that they're suddenly gonna get back in the relationship, but at the same time sort of being able to reckon with those feelings having existed and kind of come to peace with where things are, instead of it feeling like what might have been, and having that be a lingering regret forever. And I think this movie is just lovely.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really liked it. I liked it. I liked the whole. I mean, the feast scene is
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
With her, her helper who was actually truly her helper.
Mm-hmm.
Not someone who started out earlier in the story. Is that?
Yeah. Well, so basically, when she goes to buy these fancy ingredients, she comes back with a kid to basically like help prepare stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fun, like seeing her, like you know, kind of construct him, and then he's out there and he's like giving her feedback, and then
Mm-hmm.
he's getting into the wine, and like I mean, there's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's all kind of that part of it, like it gives enough levity to like the whole thing, and then like you said, the commitment to not enjoying the meal is
Mm-hmm.
just so funny. Other than
Mm-hmm.
the one, like you said, the one guest who's the soldier who's just like
Like he
keeps
was
coming
not involved in that discussion, so he doesn't understand why nobody is commenting on why the food's so
right.
good.
So he's just like enjoying this and
Mm-hmm.
saying it, and they're all kind of looking at him, and like when he kind of gives them permission to like like or when he asks them about it, like they answer with something complete non
Yeah, like
sequitur.
they'll comment on the weather or something. He'll say like,
Yeah,
"This is real turtle soup," and they're saying, "Yes, the weather is nice."
yeah,
Yeah. And I think there's one point where he sips one of the wines and he's saying, "I think this is very expensive wine name."
1846.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
And
Yeah,
and then the way they react is as though he has said, "This is as good as if it were that famous wine." And he's saying, "No, I think that's actually what this is." And they're saying, "Oh, yes, yes." He's like, "You okay, you're agreeing with me, but you don't know what I'm talking about," which makes it hard for me to explain any better.
yeah. So that part's great, and then
Mm-hmm.
I mean I really liked it. I just it it felt like I don't know, like this is not a criticism at all,
Mm-hmm.
but like I'm just trying to figure out like why I'm not as enthusiastic. Like, I mean, I enjoyed it, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I guess it's almost like three acts.
Yeah.
There's like the long act of like all their like preparation and angst about what this feast is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the feast, which is really good, and then like that third act where they like heal and all that
Mm-hmm.
almost felt rushed
Mm-hmm.
to me. Like it felt like this weird like kind of postscript thing, like almost something that would run with the credits. Like that's kind of
Okay.
the
I
feeling
mean,
I got.
I could see that. Like it doesn't feel that way to me. I think could be part of a thing of like having not seen it before and watching it for the first time. Often, pacing can work that way, right? Like, so sometimes when you kind of know what's coming, the pacing feels more even because you see where things are being set up and so on, and that sort of thing. I don't know if that's the issue. Um,
It might be because, like I said, it felt like it gave the feeling that the setup was longer than it needed to be.
mm.
The feast was right about right, and the climax and the resolution was
Mhm.
quicker than it should have been.
Well, I feel
And
like
that's
the
just a
setup is
feeling, right?
like what I would say is that I don't think that the setup is too long because it's necessary in order for those final moments to have any weight to them,
Yeah.
right? Like if you have not set up what the problem is, solving it doesn't do anything.
Nope, that makes sense.
Which is not to say, I mean, that, a feeling of pacing can still be a reasonable criticism. I'm just saying that's why, to me, it doesn't feel too long.
Yeah.
But it's also like this is a movie I've seen several times. And so I'm kind of like, I know what's coming and when and that sort of thing. Um, it's interesting because it's based on a short story, which I had not read until I got the Criterion Blu-ray, which came with a little booklet that had the short story in it. And it's interesting because a lot of it is almost like word for word. But it's, as is often the case when you're adapting a short story instead of like a full novel, like the movie is kind of almost the exact length to just actually just do the story, right? As opposed to a novel where you kind of necessarily have to like trim and edit and condense and that sort of thing. Um, but like I feel so much of what for me makes the feast work is you really have to sell who these people are and why they would go into the feast feeling the way they did. Um,
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really special about this movie is that it has, I think, a very observant but also gentle um, pushback on like religious conservatism, essentially, right? Because on the one hand, the movie thinks that they're silly for worrying that it's going to be sinful to eat this fancy French food, right? But it does not go over the line of trying to tell us, therefore, these people are stupid and wrong, right? Like it treats them with sort of love and gentleness, even if it still feels like they need to be coaxed out of that hole they're hiding in. And I kind of like that about it. I like that, for example, the sisters, even though they kind of end up having this freak out about like, what are we going to be eating? Is it some sort of a witchcraft thing? It's like that sort of like panic. And it's mostly just because I think what that's really all coming from is a fear of change, right? They're worried Babette's going to leave.
Yep.
And so that's really where that anxiety is coming from, I think. But um, they are, even if we can kind of say, well, look how repressed they are living in this little town. We could even feel sorry for them in the sense that um, that they basically rejected offers of romantic relationships because their dad kind of told these guys is like, look, my daughters are my helpers. You wouldn't want to take away my helpers, would you? And so they kind of ended up giving up on possibilities of romantic relationships of their own because their dad kind of made it seem like it would be unpious to pursue them, which at the same time that I think we understand that wasn't coming from an evil place, it's also still, perhaps a lingering regret for them, right? or at least a lingering wonder. But at the same time, what we also see is that these sisters are really supporting the community, right? We see them making soup for people and bringing it out to the people who are invalids in the community and caring for people and like really trying to take care of the community and taking in Babette when she's a strange woman on the run from God knows what in a different country,
Yep.
right? But they take her in. Um, and it's notable too that the connection that sends Babette to their door is the guy who was once in love with one of the sisters. And because we have the little subplot with each of these two sisters and what their previous relationship had been. So, because we have the one sister who's just this really great singer, and this opera singer who had been kind of just like feeling a little creatively stifled, and so in some ways he was going up to see the fjords or something like that, and he just happens to hear how good a singer she is, and he wants to encourage her. He's like, if you practice this, you could be a great opera star. And so for a while he's giving her singing lessons, and it's going really well right up until we see her have a moment that we kind of have to read between the lines, but it sort of suggests that she has caught herself dreaming of going off with this guy to become a big famous singer and to be with him, and being so afraid of that desire that she just goes home and tells her dad she doesn't want to take singing lessons anymore. And this opera singer, who seemed, like we get that he's maybe kind of a cad generally, but seemed to be sincere in his affection for her and his belief that she's a great singer, is kind of left just heartbroken, like, what just happened? I thought she seemed into this, and then all of a sudden she just has her dad tell me she wants to quit. What happened? But he leaves. And it's him that knows Babette later and sends her to them. So when she shows up, she has a letter from that guy. And that's how that's why she shows up at their door. And then of course we have the general, the soldier, who you mentioned, who he had been in love with the other sister, but every time he tried to sort of approach her, he just kept getting so intimidated by her dad that he eventually just gave up. And it was something that for him had been this kind of profound feeling of cowardice. Like, I didn't go after something that I did want because I was afraid. And so he decides to recommit himself to never doing anything like that again. And then so he becomes this big famous like soldier with very decorated and all of that. And so he ends up being back in town because his mom lives nearby and is invited to the big feast. And so he comes with her. But so he is showing up at the house of this woman that decades before he had been in love with and had been too afraid to pursue in what became one of the defining moments of his life. And because he's now seen the world, he's the one that recognizes the food and all that.
Yeah.
So, but I love just all of these little pieces being layered in. But I think that, like, that first act kind of has to be long because it kind of has to establish all that stuff. But I agree also, nonetheless, that the feast itself is the centerpiece of the movie. Like, everything before it leads up to that, and everything else is kind of just denouement, from that. But at the same time, I think that last moment of, everyone's finally leaving, but they just can't, they're not quite ready for this experience they've all had to be over. They're all a little tipsy from wine, and it's a lovely evening, so they just go out and kind of start singing around the well. It's a lovely moment.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to hear you kind of explain it
Mm-hmm.
that way. I mean, Yeah.
Well, and I think the thing that made me think of this movie in the context with the theme is that while we have certainly talked in the other movies about the idea of food and cooking as art and as a way of expressing yourself and as something that can connect you to emotions from your life in a very powerful, profound way, this movie really focuses on the idea of how sharing a meal together as a group becomes this sort of communion ritual experience in a profound way, like that just sitting in a room and talking probably wouldn't, but all sharing a meal does.
Hmm.
And the way that food can do that also, you know, it's I think it's meaningful that, when you reconnect with an old friend or you go out on a date, so often these things are kind of framed around you get a meal or a drink or something like that, because it's these shared experiences are meaningful to our brains.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason that you have a reception after a wedding,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's yes, in some sense, it's sort of transactional in that the
Mm-hmm.
wedding takes place in a time when people need to eat before they can carry on with the party. But in some sense, it's also like, hey, we brought all of us together, like we're
Mm-hmm.
going to celebrate this by sharing a meal,
Yeah.
you know. Um, yeah, I 100% agree with that. So
Um,
that's I think that's probably why I like the feast part of it.
oh
I
yeah.
mean,
Well,
it's an entertaining part of the movie
yeah.
either way, but I think yeah, I 100% agree with you
Mm-hmm.
that you know there is a communal aspect, which again, it's yes, like you said, other animals eat together,
Mm-hmm.
but not to like sort of elevate their relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Yeah.
convenient.
It's survival.
Yeah, it
But
can.
but I think it is something that spans every culture, that food and drink become important to almost every ritual we have in some way, right? I mean, it's just like, think about what traditions we have as human beings that don't involve food or drink somewhere in there. I mean, it's just something that's part of our lives in such a fundamental way. And yet, even still, it does not, even though it can become routine, there are times when it is also elevated.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, this movie is kind of about people who had forgotten that rediscovering it, even if they kind of had to be tricked into it.
No, I
um,
agree.
yeah.
I think it's yeah.
And there's lots of little grace notes that work, especially on a rewatch. For example, the scene when the sisters have just hired Babette when they teach her how to make bread soup. And they're explaining, here's how you do it. You take this old crusty bread and you crumble it in, and then you're pouring ale on it. And you just, if you like, knowing who she really is, watching Babette's face in that scene when they're saying, and okay, and here's how you prepare these salted fish. It's just kind of like, she's like, oh, yeah, oh, all right. I will do it that way because that's what you're asking me to do. But also, of course, why she's so insistent when she is offering this feast, that she says, "But I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to make the things that you usually want." But even with that soup, the soup that they're showing her is kind of so horrible, and like and so she clearly improves it over time. And so, like, there's the bit when she is off buying ingredients and the sisters suddenly have to reckon, it's like it feels like a practice run for what they're going to do without her. and all of a sudden they're having to make the soup again, and all these people that these poor invalids that they bring the soup to are suddenly like, why is the soup bad again now? It was so good for a while. And that's just, that's in the sequence where they're kind of building anxiety of like, what are we going to do without her? Um, and I just, yeah. So lots of little fun notes, but it's there's no question whatsoever that the feast is like, that's the centerpiece. That's what the whole movie's about. That's why it's called Babette's Feast. It's in the name. But I definitely recommend people check this one out. It is, Dutch language, but it has, several lines in French when the characters are speaking French. But it's fairly readily available. Um, where did you ended up just getting it on Prime or something like that?
I forget where I got all of them because some of them were on HBO Max.
Mm.
I think I got this one on Prime. Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up. Part of the reason I was thinking about it is because I had bought it at the Criterion Collection edition on a sale, so I had it, and that's part of why what inspired me to present the theme was I wanted to watch that for it. But in any case, um, food movies. Do we want to rattle through some honorable mentions of other good food movies?
Did we do that? No.
I mean, we
Um,
kind of touched on some, but like for example, Big Night was the other one that I talked about. Maybe and possibly would have done instead of Pig, and that one's also really good with Stanley Tucci and Anthony, forgetting his last name, but the guy who played Monk. Um, but yeah, the two of them and Ian Holm and their brothers running an Italian restaurant, and it's really good. Also, um, I I don't know. That's the first one that came to mind. But so in any case, um, maybe we're ready to go ahead and decide what we want to do for the next episode.
yeah. Had you thought of anything?
No, that's why I asked you in the message if you had thought of anything. I picked this one. So it's kind of your turn if you have any ideas, but we can puzzle
Uh,
through something together if we need
yeah, you didn't say that in the message. It's my turn.
to. Well,
So I was doing something else, and I was like, ah. So speaking of like movies that you want an excuse to watch again,
hmm,
I just saw one of my streaming services now has Spy Game.
okay,
Let me see which one that is. It is Netflix. So
okay,
Spy Game
Spy
is
Game.
on Netflix.
Which
Yep.
one is Spy Game? Like the title is definitely familiar, but I'm not placing it right off the bat.
Robert Redford, Brad Pitt.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It yeah, it's sort of a transitional spy movie. Like Robert Redford is the mentor who kind of came out of the Cold War era,
Mm-hmm.
and he's mentoring Brad Pitt as they enter into the like post Cold War like Middle East spy era, and like kind of the relationship between them and the spy craft that kind of is transitioning.
Okay, okay.
So I like it. It is not the best spy movie, but I like it. And so spy movies, like
Okay.
true spy games,
Sure, sure. Right, because like certainly
not
we've
like
we've
James
talked about
Bond,
we've talked about James Bond movies, right? So, but
right?
like having it be
Realistic spy movies,
okay, yeah.
like
So not even so much serious, but just like a little bit more focused on espionage as it really exists.
right. So movies like Bridge of Lies,
Well, I was thinking Bridge of Spies is
Bridge of Spies.
yeah. I
Sorry,
was going to say is Bridge of Spies lies a different one?
Bridge
Yeah.
of
Okay.
yeah. No,
Bridge of
sorry.
Spies is
I was
good.
thinking ahead. Bridge of Spies, um,
Maybe like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. But I was also like, do we want to do them all sort of modern, but like
Hmm.
treat talking about different eras, or do we want to catch ones? I mean, because technically, The Third Man is a spy espionage movie.
I love The Third Man. I would not
I
hate
know,
rewatching The Third Man.
I know. That's why I brought it in there.
Well,
Uh, There's
let's
some Hitchcock ones that I think we've already watched. You know, there's
we did North by Northwest for sure.
yeah, that's a pretty good espionage movie.
We did Notorious also, I think. Yeah, that was not on the list, but I think that was one of the like write-in
That was
ones.
our like, hey, what's a movie that was a Hitchcock,
Yeah, I
you
think
know.
brought up specifically because, even though there's three Hitchcock movies on the original AFI list, it's, you know, I kind of always comment with Hitchcock is like, he's got three movies on the AFI list, and none of those three are my favorite. But yeah, so I just pulled up a list of like espionage movies, and there's, as you might expect, a lot, but also a lot of them that are being called espionage movies that are pretty broadly cast, meaning, you know, what constitutes an espionage movie is a pretty wide net. Um, but
Yes. I mean,
yeah,
like I said, we've watched tons of them already because like we've watched all the Mission
mm-hmm.
Impossibles, like they're all technically espionage movies.
Yeah, watched Tom
Yeah,
Clancy.
all the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of things outside of that that
What
would
about uh like I've got a couple that are like crossing wires in my head because I don't remember how much they might be based on like real stuff. But there was Burn After Reading
burn after
and
reading.
The Informant. Although The Informant, I guess, is less espionage and more just like crime investigation, right? Yeah, that's not international espionage.
Another one
It's
that
a fun
I've
movie though.
that a podcast I listened to has been talking about recently is the Conversation, which is like the Gene Hackman.
Oh
He's a
yeah,
surveillance
yeah,
expert, and
right.
just kind of like how surveillance used to look
Mm-hmm.
versus, which again would be spreading too thin. But like you take like a movie like The Conversation, and then you look at like Enemy of the State, right,
Mm-hmm.
and like how surveillance has
Yeah.
dramatically changed, right? Which I don't know that we need to watch both of those, but like that's a theory.
Well,
Bridge
how
of
about
Spies,
this?
Peter Taylor
Bridge
Soldier
of
Spies.
Spies is good. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Here I'm gonna realistic espionage movies. Let's see if that about that. Boy, okay. Still, Google's answer to that includes a lot of things like Mission Impossible and The Bourne Identity.
Not necessarily
Um,
realistic.
um, Argo is an interesting. Um,
Argo's an interesting one. Munich is technically like that.
yeah.
Kind of in
Well,
that
for
same
that matter, Zero Dark 30, right? We watched that, um, but that's another example one that's based on kind of real world stuff. Yeah, Enemy of the State also on this list of realistic spy movies. Sure. Um, I don't know. So what about Spy Game, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Bridge of Spies also all seem like good choices. Um, do we want to just throw the third man in there? I mean, I don't necessarily know how realistic it is, but it's a great movie for sure that I wouldn't mind watching.
I think that'd be just kind of a alternative, like just get something different.
Yeah. I mean, and are there any of those four that you're feeling hesitation about, or?
No, when we can find maybe another way to watch this, or I could just rewatch it. We don't have to have this reason, but I did want to rewatch The Conversation.
Okay. Well, the conversation is good. What about, let's see, if we were going to swap out one of the four we've mentioned so far, like the conversation, I think is good. Like it's been a long time since I watched it, but I'm pretty sure that it's very interesting. It's like it's a great movie, and it's very much about like the whole surveillance thing. But it isn't really like international espionage, right? Isn't it just like like
I
he's investigating a crime? Isn't that what it was? Or am I thinking of something else?
I
Here, let's see.
yes, but I thought it elevated.
Let's see.
Maybe not.
A paranoid, secretive surveillance expert has a crisis of conscience when he suspects that the couple he is spying on will be murdered. Mystery thriller.
Yeah, that's a little different. I think
It's
he's
a good
spying
movie for
on
sure.
them. Yeah, he's spying on them, but in a different way.
Right.
So
Well, and for
let's
that
put that
matter,
as
the Third Man, if we were going to eliminate it for that, for the Third Man is like it takes place internationally, but it's really kind of just it's more crime than espionage still, right? Like because we've got a guy looking for his buddy who he thinks is dead, and it becomes clear that his buddy was involved in this like criminal underground that's war profiteers basically.
yeah.
I
So
mean, I love that movie. I'm not trying to talk us out of watching it per se, but I would agree that it's less on theme than the others.
so I'm looking at some others, like just trying to find something a little bit different that's in
Something
there.
older, maybe,
Yeah,
because
something
we
older.
need
So
something older.
Three
Um,
Days of the Condor.
let's see, classic espionage movies. Again, that's always going to be a.
3 Days of
Oh,
the Condor, really good class. I mean, it's Robert Redford again, but
yeah.
that's a
Let's see, because Notorious. Oh, let's see. No, never mind. That's there's got to be some that like go even further back.
The Spy Who Came from the Cold.
I don't know that one,
That's
which
an
is not a does not eliminate it. I just don't. I can't.
it's a Richard Burton movie where I don't remember who wrote it, but it was. I mean, it's like a famous novel from the 50s or 60s, and
Mm,
basically he's a the spy who came in from the cold. Like means basically he was like a spy, and then he like has to like call himself out in order to like save whatever his deal is. I can't remember like the whole. I don't remember all the ins and outs of it, but like that's what it means came in from the cold. Like right, he was like
mm-hmm.
out on the cold and came in. Um, but that's I mean, that's a famous like spy novel. Like that's a Tom Clancy. Like this is one of my that and 3 Days of the Condor, which is in 1975, are like
Mm-hmm.
movies that
You know, I've never seen 3 Days of the Condor, so maybe that's enough reason to pick that one. Like I'm aware of it, but I haven't seen it.
it's good. It's Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I can't remember who wrote it, but
The thing is that there's a million spy movies. The question is how committed we are to the theme that they're at least even remotely realistic, right? And the thing is, I haven't seen 3 Days of the Condor, so I don't really know about that.
well, let's just throw it in there and we can
Okay.
discuss it.
All right. So that would make our so spy game, Bridge
Yep.
of Spies,
Yep.
um, 3 Days of the Condor is the one we just said, right?
Yep.
And then Tinker
Taylor
Tailor
Swift.
Soldier Spy.
Yep.
All right. Great. So that's it for next time. Then we will be watching spy movies, the four that we just said. So between now and then, thanks for listening and watching, everyone, and watch good movies.
Good movies.